So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our last formal meeting of the year. I'll begin by acknowledging that wherever you are in Australia, you are on Aboriginal land that was never ceded, and I pay my respect to First Nations elders, past, present, and emerging. So tonight we are delighted to have three of our local state MPs joining us. I'm going to introduce them to you now and then explain the evening's format. So John Kennedy is the Labour member for Hawthorn. He worked as a teacher before entering politics and served as the founding principal of Loyola College for nearly 30 years. He is passionate about education and public transport. John is in his first term of Parliament, having succeeded incumbent Liberal MP John Pizzuto in 2018. He's only the second Labour member ever to win this traditional blue ribbon seat, and the first to do so in 63 years. Will Fowles is the Labour member for Burwood. Will was a small business owner working in the communications field before being elected to Parliament in 2018. Will is passionate about public housing and mental health reform. He sits on the Environment and Planning Committee of Parliament. Paul Hamer is the Labour member for Box Hill. Before his election to Parliament in 2018, Paul, who holds a Master's of Engineering Science, worked as an engineer on many critical transport projects across the state. Paul also sits on the Environment and Planning Parliamentary Committee. Each of these MPs are in their first 4 years, so their first term, which ends in November 22, and so will be up for re-election. The member for Kew, Tim Smith, who has been much in the news lately, was invited to speak at this meeting, but declined to respond. So we have provided 4 questions to the MPs in advance. We're going to ask them each to provide short answers to these set questions, maximum 2 minutes. We're going to vary the order of who answers first. We will then have time for audience questions to be taken from the chat. So please put your questions in the chat as they occur to you. Our first question is, 2021 has been another roller coaster year. What caused you to be hopeful and what caused you to despair? If we could first hear from John, then Paul, then Will. Over to you, John.
Okay, thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. Well, I would say for me, and I presume we're talking about climate matters, not other things, and let me go for that. Although, yeah, okay, let me do that. What caused me some despair was really summed up in the activity of the Burwood Council when there was a motion led by 3 women, headed by Jane Addis, who is now returning as our new mayor, actually, as of last night or 2 nights ago, declaring a climate emergency. And in that discussion, people were saying things like distractors, I think, like, well, there hasn't been enough consultation, there's this, there's that, and so, and the whole thing got thrown out. And I thought, I can't believe this now in these times and in this situation. However, then under the leadership of Gary Thompson as mayor, it came up again, and this time it passed. And so, in a way, despair led to hope, because you would hope that politicians like them and us reflect people and reflect people's understandings and appreciation and so on. So that'd be my answer to that question.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Over to Paul.
Thanks, Lynn. So I would contrast my hopefulness with my despair in terms of what we as a government have done versus what we see the federal government has been doing. So I was particularly pleased to see the action that we were taking in terms of reduction of transport emissions and reduction of agricultural emissions. I think they have been two of the most difficult ones to tackle. Issues such as stationary energy, I think there's a pretty clear pathway in terms of renewables and the like, but transport and agriculture have been growing, and I think the initiatives that we announced 6 months ago, and obviously, as you read out, I have a particular interest in the transport sector. The move to have the bus fleet, or all new buses from 2025 to be zero tailpipe emissions. There was, I think there was the commitment also to move over the train fleet to run on renewable energy as well, and obviously there's quite a range of incentives which were also announced for the electric vehicle industry. So I think some of those, particularly on that public transport side, is really promising, and is really a big deal. From the despair point of view, I think over the last few weeks we've seen the federal government. I mean, they were sort of brought kicking and screaming to adopt a 2050 target that basically every state has already adopted and every business has already adopted, and they're basically just relying on the states to do everything to make sure that to get to where we were probably going to get anyway. And I think it was a real, probably not unexpected, but a real disappointment that to see the federal government parade that they've got suddenly. They're all on board the climate train, and this is what they deliver.
Right, thank you very much for that. And Will, over to you.
Thanks, Len. Look, I'll probably go a notch up from despair and say that I was filled with incandescent rage at the Prime Minister crab walking away from a commitment around emissions reductions in 2030, taking credit for all the work that's been done by the state, saying, oh, we're going to meet our target anyway. We don't need to make a commitment around 2030 because we're going to meet it anyway, despite the fact that he and his government have done nothing towards achieving those targets. I was just incensed by that. It was deeply, deeply frustrating. And I'm sure that's frustration shared by many on this call. And I thought the crowning moment of COP26 wasn't just that the French president decided to take a baseball bat to Scott Morrison. It was the fact that the Australian government's own presentation at that conference was sponsored by Santos. I mean, you can't write this stuff. It is something straight out of Yes Minister, absolutely breathtaking in my view. But I am filled with hope, and I'm filled with hope because we're coming into an election year where I think you're going to see strong, positive plans put forward by Labor and put forward by the Greens in relation to climate change and action on climate change. And you're even seeing, frankly, in New South Wales that the coalition up there is doing heaps more on this stuff. So there will be strong alternatives for voters in our part of the world and right around the nation. And I'm enormously hopeful that climate will feature again in this election, and hopefully finally we move to getting a proper national consensus around these issues because they're so important.
Great, thanks very much for that. Going to move on to question number 2. What action to reduce emissions would you like to help your community make in 2022? And if we can first hear from Paul.
Thanks, Lynn. Well, I think I'd probably like to look at it at a very local level. I think particularly coming out of COVID, I think we've rediscovered our local shops, our local businesses, and I think even converting those trips, so going back to transport, converting those trips into a walking trip or a cycling trip, I think is really important, and it makes a huge difference if it's if that's escalated at scale. So I'd certainly like to see not just investment in sort of better cycling and walking paths, but just even from a promotional element to encourage people to come back and continue shopping locally and do that in a environmentally friendly way.
Is that something you can see that you can help with? You can help your community to achieve?
I think so, because I think it's a way of it's sort of just a reminder of just how easy it is. It's sort of it involves more education and promotion rather than necessarily, like you say, rather than necessarily significant investment. I mean, investment's one thing, and there's obviously a lot of transport infrastructure investment going on in the Box Hill electorate, but just having sometimes people probably don't even realise how proximate or easy it is to access their local shops, because they're just always been used to just hopping in the car and going down and getting something. So I mean, whether the change is I mean, to the extent that it's measurable is, I mean, I don't know, it's pretty hard to measure, but it's something that is not that difficult to promote.
Okay, thank you. And look, just a reminder to everybody to please do put your questions in the chat as they occur to you. And also just remember, keep yourself nice in the chat, as Kaz Cook would say, trying to keep things positive. So next, can we hear from Will on this issue?
Thanks very much, Lynn. Look, I've been involved in the electric car transition for a very long period of time. I used to work with a business called Better Place and a bloke called Evan Thornley, who, in addition to being a former Labor MP, founded the Look Smart business back around the time of the tech boom. And so I'm very keen to make sure that people understand what is driving the change to electric vehicles. All transport decisions are made based upon convenience and affordability. Clearly, there is work to be done on affordability, and I'll always be a strong voice inside government to make sure that we're doing the things we can do, including on the supply of electric vehicles and making sure used electric vehicles are hitting the market as a government, making sure that we're sourcing enough electric vehicles to throughput to the used market. But also talking about convenience, and the convenience thing is making sure that people understand just how many charging stations there are out there at the moment, and also building that confidence to actually go, well, if you only travel 40 kilometres in a day, you actually never need to use a public charging station, charge point. You will always be charging at home. And the final thing I'd say about that is that it's always important. If we're going to make the transition to electric vehicles, it is pointless if we're not doing it with renewable energy. Switching out petrol for coal is a redundant switch. It's just critical that the Victorian government continues to do its absolutely world-leading work in making sure that there is heaps of renewable capacity in the grid, and that we ultimately move away from using brown coal.
Great, thank you. And over to John.
Yeah, well, for me, public transport is something that's been in my blood. I've never learned to drive a car, so it's not as if I've sort of, made a conscious decision to be an advocate. That's all I've known in my 74 years is public transport. So I'm keen to see public transport improve. I think this area, particularly around Camberwell Junction, where there's 4 different tram lines and so on and so forth, is already fantastic. But I just think more can be done. Like I was talking today with someone from our seniors group who was saying that the service in one part of Burwood, for example, is still only hourly. And I know when we're looking at Auburn Road, the 624, for example, it's not a terribly good service during the weekend and so on. So I think there needs to be every encouragement given to people using to use public transport, and that'll only come about, I think, if the service is regular and if it's reliable. I also have concerns about car parks. That's a bit of a complex issue, because I suppose I'm keen on car parks at railway stations, because that helps, you know, helps the train travel and so on. But recently I've been involved with Burwood Council and others with Camberwell Green, and it seemed to me that we're on the right track to convert a car park to back to parkland as it was originally, rather than staffed car parks, when you consider that public transport is so good. So I'm probably not making a huge amount of sense, but public transport is important. And from my point of view as a local MP in Hawthorn, we proudly have produced a newsletter every fortnight without fail. We have a Lister Monday, and we've encouraged Lighter Footprints and others to do a series of articles and what have you, just to encourage people to learn about it, because particularly people of my age group, we all did physics and chemistry, maths 1 and maths 2. We didn't go near geology or biology or anything like that. And sometimes there's a bit of catching up to be done. And that's one of the contributions that I'd like to think that the Hawthorn office can make.
Great, thank you very much, John. Going to move on to the third question. What is your sense of your community's attitude towards climate change? And do you think climate policy will influence their vote in 2022? And I'm going to start by going back to you, Will.
Oh, dollar in the jar. Sorry. Absolutely. I think that climate will be at the forefront of voters' minds across the two elections that we have to get through over the course of 2022, as in fact it should be. I think you will see some differentiation, and perhaps significant differentiation at the state level on these issues, and I think you're going to see very large differentiation at the federal level, not least because Scott Morrison's record on these things is so patchy. Even if they take something that on the face of it looks progressive, it will in fact be highly unlikely to be backed up with action. And you've seen that with the deputy PM in recent days saying, well, I wasn't at COP26, I didn't sign it, even though his government, of course, is a signatory to the agreement. So to the other part of your question, Lynn, I think sorry, I've lost the flow. It was about voter intention and
climate change, the community's attitude, in the upcoming election.
Yeah, sorry. So the community attitude to these issues is one, I think, of frustration with the federal government, and I think a sense that the state government is doing a pretty good job on this stuff. There's still more to be done, clearly. I think there's some tension points around our strategy around gas, and that's I understand why people have those concerns, and I think you know there will be plenty of questions for us to answer on these issues throughout the course of the campaign too. But I think broadly speaking, I think climate is still important, and I think people are frustrated with the feds. I'd say that they're probably the two main attitudes I'm picking up.
Great, thank you. Over to you, John, for this one.
Yes, I'm conscious of the increasing commitment to recycling, using the council depots, and I've noticed those changes. And I think if you just indulge me a little, just prior to the last election, remember law and order was a big thing, and I remember being asked to speak at one of those sessions at the town hall, and a councillor got up and said that he was very proud of the fact that he'd served on a parole board and had stopped anyone from getting parole and so on. This was his idea of, tightening things up, etc. Now, what I remember most from that night was there wasn't suddenly a stampede of applause. People were actually embarrassed, and there was no response from that large audience and so on. I think it's the same with climate. I think that no longer can people just simply say, oh yeah, maybe, or maybe they're exaggerated, or whatever sort of thing. So I think when you talk about the community's attitude, I think of law and order, and I think that's changed. And I think in things like climate policy, we've seen much more understanding, and people genuinely wanting to understand as well too, which is a great start, isn't it?
Great, thank you very much. And lastly, over to you, Paul.
Thanks. Look, I probably don't have a lot to add, particularly to Will's comments. I would agree. I think these, particularly in our area in Kooyong and Chisholm, that there has been I think for quite some time, quite a strong community attitude towards doing more on climate change. And I think that does factor into a lot of people's voting patterns. I do wonder whether if the dial has moved that much from the last election, though, because I think there's you're presented with, I mean, last election, both state and federal, you were presented with two pretty stark options, and I think we'll be presented with similarly stark options next year. So I would expect to the extent that that's the primary driving issue for people, that there may not be a switch in people's vote.
Okay, yeah, interesting. You kind of hope that maybe the hip pocket, the message that climate might be good for your hip pocket, might get through and have some impact this time around, which maybe it hasn't in the past. In any case, we're going to move on to the fourth question. How can a group like ours and individual constituents be most effective in influencing government action on climate change? This is something that we're always trying to work out. What can we do that is the most effective to have impact on decisions of government? So I'm going to go first to John on this one.
Well, I don't know how helpful I'm going to be on this, because I think that Lighter Footprints has done fantastic work, but especially in the last couple of years with all the COVID problems and the lack of opportunity for in-person and so on. But I just think you're all so well organised, you know. Even your sessions, they're deliberately kept short, you know. And if they say we're going to finish at 9, we finish at 9. And the thing is, when you look at the program in Lighter Footprints, it isn't just on one angle of this issue. It's a whole variety of things. And from Homes of Court to whoever, you've done it, and you've done it well. And so I start from that point of view, but I reckon there's probably smarter people than me who can give you ways of improving, because I'm just in awe of the way it's organised, and the way you just keep it rolling along so people can't possibly fall asleep or think it's not relevant to them and so on. And you still keep coming up with new approaches to an issue, or to get people in and so on. So I think that I'm hoping to see bigger and better now that COVID is starting to be, you know, behind us a bit, and there's more opportunity for turning up and so on. But sorry, I can't add much, except I think you do a great job.
I'm going to put that back to you and say, when people come to visit you or write to you, what do you pay attention to? Do you pay attention to the number of letters you get, the number of phone calls you get, the visits you get? When people do make a visit, what works? What influences you?
Well, I certainly find it difficult when people send in, what do they call, click politics, you know, where you get the exact same letter from everybody, except to say, well, they feel strongly about it, but then I don't know how much they've thought about it, and I'm not quite too sure always whether they're genuinely concerned or they're from opposition parties or whatever. It's the individual letter you know, that comes in, and there aren't huge numbers of these. There's a lot of click politics. I'm sure the others would agree too, whether it's on pandemic legislation or on equal opportunity and so on. But I certainly take notice of it. There's one there for me at the moment on Canterbury railway station, you know, and I'm thinking, and well argued and well presented, and you sort of think, well, I've got to do something here. This has been thoughtfully, you know, expressed and prepared and so on and that, and in line with, for example, our party's policies and so on in doing what you can with things like car parks, dare I say. I find that in Hawthorn, we don't get too many visitors, as hardly anybody comes to our door. We probably get half a dozen phone calls a day. And so really most of the communication is with emails, and that mixture of the one-click politics on the one hand and the individual person who's done for us. So my other colleagues might be able to talk a bit more about what strikes a chord or what strikes action.
Okay, thanks for that response. It makes me think we haven't been knocking on your door frequently enough, so you can expect us again sometime pretty soon.
Good.
So I'm going to go to Paul next.
Yeah, thanks. I think that being well organised is really key. Then getting a good base of support and building on that base of support is also really important. And having those members, and I know that particularly pre-COVID, you were a lot more present at sort of at street stalls and like Campbell Market and various other places, and I guess encouraging people then to participate in the actions that you're taking. Yeah, look, I mean, our office seems to be a lot busier than John's office, and I think, yeah, having. I don't know about the effectiveness of a pro forma campaign. I don't think that is generally is going to get a particularly much of a response from, particularly sort of through the minister's office. But I'd also encourage you to think about some actually practical solutions rather than just saying, "Oh, we're not doing enough." It's about, and like John made the reference to issues at Canterbury Rail Station. So it's a sort of to do with a particular solution and say, well, we're looking for a particular solution, and we might have a solution in mind, and putting forward that suggestion, because that's a lot easier to, I suppose, put forward as a suggestion than just having a complaint that, oh, the government's not doing enough.
And so when you do get a number of people communicating with you on a particular issue, and it's not kind of within your area of responsibility, do you pass that on up the line? Does it go anywhere, or does it just end up staying in your office?
No, so every request, like and say if a request comes in from anyone who's had who's written it personally, we'll always get a response. Now, some of those there might just be an inquiry about particular current government policy, or they need some assistance with something, and sometimes we can help them out straight away. Other times we will be seeking advice from the minister or the minister's office. So particularly if it's a change of government policy, for example, then that's something that would be fed through to the minister's office and say, okay, we've had received correspondence from a number of interested constituents about this matter. It's it's difficult. Like I said, usually if it's seeking a specific action, like that's like saying we should shut down all the coal power stations or buy immediately or something like that. I mean, that's not a sort of an action that obviously that where individual MPs can take, and it's probably not even an action that the minister can take because there's contractual issues in there as well. And so what I'm talking about is more about some of that practical actions that we may be more able to advocate. So it's like going back to what I was talking about before. Even it might be sort of connecting up bike paths or things like that, which are barriers to people perhaps using a more sustainable transport, that then we can take on as a local advocate.
Can I just add in there that you're probably familiar with the system that every ministry has somebody who liaises with us, and they're called the CLA, so that when a letter comes to us, I'm a bit obsessive in my office to have that answered within 24 hours to say, yes, we've got it and we're seeking information. And when we send that letter to them, we will say, can you, can you affirm it, or can you say something's happening about it or whatever? And we've got a pretty good service there, basically. You know, sometimes it's a bit complex and it takes a bit longer, but generally it comes back. And then what we do is then write to that person back and say, well, this is what we're advised by the minister in that particular, it might be an episode or a situation, and this is what's happened, etc., and so forth and so on. So when I came into it, I was quite impressed by it, I must say, that there's quite a system established for dealing with letters. So it is worthwhile sending in personal or individual letters on things. And they do receive personal attention in response.
Thanks, John. I'm going to hand over to Will.
Yeah, all I would add to what Paul and John have said is that you should never underestimate the power of a conversation. Get on the phone, talk to your MPs, ask for a phone call, be polite. I probably don't have to tell this group that, but we've had some spectacularly hostile and rude correspondence and phone calls over the course of the past 2 years. Put your case, put it in a civil manner, don't abuse anyone, and you will get a hearing. And it doesn't matter whether you're MPs from the left or the right or somewhere else. So if you politely request a phone call, you will almost certainly get it.
Can I ask, is it useful to you, and do people ever bring experts to you? So, for example, we're very concerned about gas at the moment. So is it useful if we make an appointment to see you and we bring someone who is an expert in the issues?
Sure. Look, I mean, MPs are, by dint of their role, generalists, not specialists as a rule. I mean, we all have our own particular areas of interest, but I wouldn't profess for a second to be the world authority on all things gas. And we're always welcome the opportunity to learn something more about it. And then when it comes to the policy debates, whether they're debates inside the government or debates inside the party, if we're better equipped for those debates, that can only be a good thing.
Okay, I've got one more question before we go to questions from the chat. So can you, as MPs, get people like us access to ministers or ministerial advisors who are really involved in making decisions about the things that we care about?
Maybe.
Is that doable?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of depends on the circumstances. It depends on the style of the individual minister. It depends on, just how much traffic their office gets. I mean, without, picking too much on the specifics, but I know, for example, that in the youth justice portfolio, they don't have a massive queue of people necessarily to get through to seeing, but in portfolios like environment and education and health, they've got, you know, hundreds, if not thousands, of requests coming through for time with the minister or with advisors. So the answer isn't no, but it's definitely not an unequivocal yes. I think it's it'll depend on the circumstances. But if there's a specific ask of the government, I would always encourage you to frame it in those terms. If you just want to get together for a chat, the answer will almost always be no. If you have a specific idea or a specific request that you think warrants government action and you've got some evidence for that, then I think that's the best way to prosecute the argument.
Great, thank you. Much appreciated. We're always trying to work out how we can be most effective, and I suppose how we can use you most effectively, sorry to say. But look, thank you very much for those answers. We're now going to move to be taking questions from the audience. So those questions are going to be taken from the chat. If you haven't yet put your question in the chat, please do it now. So we've got two people who will be taking questions from the chat. That's Carolyn Ingverson and Julian Atchison. So I'm going to hand over to you two.
Okay, thanks. Well, I've been scanning what we've got, and we have heaps already, which makes it, for sure, we'll get more questions than we can answer tonight. And I'd like to just check with the MPs that we can pass these on to you and collect some information so that we, in fact, have some answers back to us of questions that we don't cover. The wide range includes EVs, the local council, gas, the role of independence, the role of whether we should have car parks in line with the federal government promises, forests and issues, protests and if they matter, local planning issues and the extent to which they dominate. So we've got a really wide range of things. And one of the questions that was asked right up front was one that I'd like you to answer at the end, the very last question, which I think is, what is your political legacy? What do you want to be your political legacy for the time that you've been in? Just to have in the back of your mind something that you think you want to be proud of and remembered for. So we'll come back to you at the very end. But there are some quite local questions that relate to specifics in Box Hill Station and that sort of thing. And I think they are possibly more like questions that should be answered direct to the Minister on that issue. So I'm going to skip those and go to the question of electric vehicles, which comes up all the way through. There are very many concerns about the fuel efficiency standards and why in federal inaction is there anything that the states can do about that. But I think fundamentally the question that is asked perhaps by Jan Malloy is why has the government chosen at this point in time to put a tax on getting electric vehicles in the face of trying to get incentives?
Sure. So I might pick up this one if I can, Carolyn. I have been reading the questions as they come through, and there's two sort of fundamental issues that I guess we want to address here. So the first is around the way the taxation model is going to be rolling forward. Now, it's a bit quirky and it's a bit dry because it's ultimately a constitutional matter. But under the Constitution, the federal government has the power to charge excises.
Yes.
That is not a state power, and so the federal government does it. They do it in relation to fuel, and 1/3 of the money that comes out of Victorians' pockets through the fuel excise, only 1/3 of it comes back to Victoria to spend on roads. 2/3 gets redistributed around the rest of the federation. That is a classic example of a wildly inefficient tax. Yeah. And from the Victorian perspective, is something that we would love to reform. Well, there is a reform opportunity now because the federal government doesn't have a taxation-specific power for electrons, which is great news. And it doesn't have a taxation power when it comes to road user charges, which is also good news. So I absolutely understand why it appears counterintuitive, but why we're putting in place a road user charge framework is so that as the fuel excise disappears over time, that we do have a replacement source of revenue. Now, I appreciate, and I spoke earlier about convenience and affordability, I appreciate that on the face of it, that makes affordability look worse, but in the first 3 years of its operation, more than 3 times the amount taken from the ZLEV road user charge, more than 3 times, will be spent back on charging infrastructure and other measures for ZLEVs. In addition to that, there's a $3,000 subsidy we've introduced for the purchase of new ZEVs. So the aggregate of all of that is significantly more money has been put in, and by significantly, I don't mean 20, 40% more, like multiples of the amount of money are being taken from ZLEV users is being put back into either subsidies or the charging infrastructure. So what we want to end up with a system where Victorian road users pay a charge that is used for Victorian roads. That is what we're working towards, and the efficiency will be such that the road use charging will ultimately be less than what is being paid now in the fuel excise. So that's on the.
Would you not acknowledge, however, that for someone who's looking to buy an EV, that additional charge is a disincentive, and this is the point, this is where we're at the moment.
So the charge will come out at about $250 a year for the typical user, and I think when you're looking at the totality of the expense, the amount saved on fueling generally, the $3,000 subsidy up front, the discounted rego and the other things, I think you have to look at the totality of the package. We're creating this charge for constitutional reasons. It's esoteric, it's dry, but we needed to put our foot on the space because otherwise the feds would have marched in and taken it from us in order to redistribute that money to marginal Queensland seats.
Okay, Julian.
Excellent. Thank you for that one. I'll lead off with one of the first questions that was asked, and it was about bikes and cycling. What are the practical steps that you can do as MPs, as the state government, to try and encourage more people to cycle? There are clearly people in the chat who want to take this up and either don't have access to infrastructure or feel safe enough. What are the practical things that you can do as MPs in a state government?
So I'm happy to take this one, and I particularly given that I raised cycling and walking a couple of times in my answers. Right, I think that there has been a huge increase in demand for cycling, and including in commuter cycling, and I think that obviously seeking funding for some of those infrastructure connections are really important. We're not like if you look at, say, the northeast, I know that on Heidelberg Road they put up some pop-up bicycle lanes and put some barriers up there, and I believe they were very successful. But you do need to have the infrastructure in place that actually allows that to happen. So even, like, for example, you probably couldn't do that on Canterbury Road safely and just say, oh, we'll put bollards down one lane of Canterbury Road. So you do need to work with the geography that you have and identify where the improvements can be. Certainly in our area, both John and I have been working on the plan for the Box Hill to Hawthorn path. That is a quite an expensive piece of infrastructure, but it is planned to pretty much follow the rail line and continue from the existing path at Box Hill all the way to the Yarra Trail. Obviously, the anniversary trail that crosses in the middle there, and variety of north-south paths that cross in further into Whitehorse. So that's I think we've both seen that that's an important will be an important infrastructure project in the years to come, but it doesn't happen overnight.
Okay. All right. I'm going to move you on to gas, and there are a couple of questions I'm going to combine here. There's one from Julie Mulhauser. Research has shown that households would save money by going all electric, especially if they have rooftop PV. New homes should not connect to the gas in the first place, and existing homes should plan replacement of gas appliances with efficient electric units. And there's a related one. Why not use looming gas shortfalls to accelerate, this is from Rob Brown, to accelerate the conversion of homes and industry to renewable electricity rather than proceed with approval of more gas fields that have broad environmental impacts. So the question's really related, one, to the local uptake of full electrification of households, therefore reducing the need for gas. And the other one relates to the fact that there's, exploring more gas fields, and which this government has supported, rather than putting energy into the electrification of homes.
So I'm happy to have a bash at that one if my colleagues happy to let me have a go at it. So there's a few things to say. Well, so the short answer is I agree in principle with most of that. We are through the new housing, social and affordable housing we're building, 12,000 homes. All of those homes are going to be pure electric. So the government, in terms of putting its money where its mouth is in its own home building, has made it abundantly clear that we are preferring electric as the mode of energy delivery in houses, and that of course means no more gas hot water services, no more gas stoves. We are doing a bunch of work around whether that very, very expensive and substantial and significant gas network can over time be used to deliver, hopefully, ideally, some zero carbon fuels. Yeah, whether that's hydrogen or something else, who knows? That'll be for biochemists and industrial engineers and people with way more letters after their name than me to resolve. So in terms of the electrification of the rest of the universe, I accept that the 12,000 new homes is a small chunk of the entirety of the market. I think it would be really expensive to do it on a universal basis, but I think it's absolutely appropriate that government consider what telegraphing it can do to the market now to make sure that new builds are highly preferred, that they become pure electric, and that over time we make it clear to the market that there will be some point at which we simply won't have domestic gas appliances. But Victoria's a bit of an unusual case. We are far bigger users of gas for domestic purposes than any of the other jurisdictions in Australia. So the challenge is big for us, which isn't to say we shouldn't take it on. It just means that it's significant.
Okay.
And probably I would add a follow-on onto that. We've got the gas substitution roadmap that's coming up. You're talking about new build homes and new developments. Do the MPs think there's a point where the state government is effectively going to be able to go, we're not going to do any more oil and gas exploration, and we're going to rule out gas for all new builds? So instead of focusing on certain urban developments, it can be completely ruled out.
I'm sure we'll reach that point in time. It's not for me to make that announcement here. That's an announcement for the Energy and Environment Minister to make at some future point. But I think I'd correctly assess the mood of the room that is where the entirety of the Labor caucus wants to see us get to. As always with these things, there needs to be an orderly transition plan, and that might be a point about which the Greens and us disagree on some of these things about the pace of change and what amelioration you have to put in place. And I appreciate that won't be to everyone's taste, but we are a government that really wants to see Victoria powered basically exclusively by renewable energy just as quickly as we can.
I'm just thinking of my own case when I moved into this retirement village, which has 69 units 5 years ago, and it was an all-electric show. However, about half a dozen or so managed to get permission to have gas heating. And I think it's just a matter of time, because I have heard of a few other cases around here where that permission has been refused. So it's like the passage of time. So we started off all electric, we allowed some exceptions, and now we're not allowing exceptions. So that's just a local example, if you like.
Julian, do you want to take a question from the chat, or will I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I might actually draw on John's answer and ask him to continue a little bit. We've got some renters in the chat who are talking about access to cycling infrastructure for one, but that draws out the idea of how you give renters more rights, more access to energy efficient spaces, to renewable energy. If you want the state to be powered by 100% renewable energy, how do you make sure that every household is able to access that? So a renter's rights and that sort of access to energy efficient dwellings is an issue. If you want to comment on that.
Can you repeat that for me?
Yeah, it's the access of renters to spaces that are energy efficient, that are powered by 100% renewable electricity. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I've just imagined that's just going to be more in terms of advancing legislation, but maybe one of my colleagues might be able to comment a bit more on renters. That's one area, by the way, we do get a fair bit of emails is from renters about landlords, about rules, regs, and that sort of thing.
So I was just going to add that the Solar Homes program also had or has a stream specifically dedicated to landlords for that specific reason. So that you're right. Typically, a normal grant program would probably have been taken up by owner occupiers, because they're going to then see the benefit in terms of lower power bills. And it was specifically identified that was I guess that rental market would be may otherwise be difficult to encourage landlords to participate in the scheme. So there is I guess a specific tranche of the program that accommodates landlords to make those investments, and then that obviously reduces the bills on the tenant, but then makes an overall benefit to more energy efficient homes, along with the like the social housing and other initiatives.
Okay, what about something a little bit different here, which is one from Ray Peck, which I've lost, that said, what's happening with our forest policies and the extent to which in the climate movement, we are so very conscious that every tree sequesters carbon at a very high rate and is to be treasured. In terms of a climate issue, keeping forests in the ground is an extremely important one. And we feel each time we look at photographs of what's happening in this state that the rate at which trees are going down is still way too high to be commensurate with the view that our government is concerned about climate change issues. And that's not talking about all the other issues that go with the whole biodiversity that forests provide. So our question to you is, we know what the government has made a commitment to in terms of reducing logging by 2030, but we think that's way too far in the future. Are any of you of the same view?
Well, I have a view that Vic Forest isn't our friend, and that they have muddied the water in many respects. I guess I'm probably not meant to say that they are a government agency, but I think they've thrown up challenges for all of us in our general desire to see logging phased out over time. I think part of the political memory of the Labor Party is the 2004 election between Mark Latham and John Howard, and Mark Latham making a bunch of very progressive and sensible announcements regarding old growth logging, and then John Howard being feted as a hero by CFMEU members in a logging town in Tasmania, and that being seen as one of the great triumphs of the campaign. Now, I don't suggest that that is a reason to not act. I simply say that if there's a bit of reticence from some members of the government and indeed a number of members of the parliament, it's probably around a bit of that kind of institutional memory. That's a challenge for us, I guess, more than you guys, but it's something we continue to plug away on.
Anything else from anyone? We are very keen to see some of the people who are in the government but not perhaps in ministerial positions putting some pressure on their colleagues with respect to this particular issue about forests. I just wondered if you had this.
I would say that you shouldn't. I know. Probably everyone in this room would like to see, or everyone is on the call would like to see it phased out earlier. But I don't think you should underestimate the step that was taken in terms of actually phasing that out. I know you'd like it earlier, as would some other parties, but that is considering where we came from, I think that was a very significant step, and I think it shouldn't be underestimated about that the step that was taken, particularly, like you say, given some of the challenges that Will points out, and obviously the challenges that still exist within sections of the Labor Party that oppose this move. That's it. You say it. I think that's to reach that point, and obviously there was a immediate protection of additional land, additional areas from logging, and at least you say a clear date that's at the end of the decade.
Okay, Julian.
Thank you. Following on from that idea, and we've seen this week that big forests were caught illegally logging in water catchment. I can't quite remember which one. The question of water came up in the chat. Does the state government need to make some stronger water policies to make sure that we're protecting the amazing resources we've got, especially in the Melbourne catchment areas?
I'm not sure. A huge amount of excitement to answer that one, Julian. We're all falling over ourselves to rip into that. Look, I have to say I don't. I'm not sure that I'm well enough briefed on some of the water catchment issues to be able to answer that question in any great detail. I don't know if John and Paul are a bit closer to some of that.
Yeah, no, I was about to say the same. I don't know the detail. I think we have been very fortunate that some of the original planners of Melbourne laid down and secured those areas from very, very early days, and particularly compared to what you see overseas, that they are largely protected areas for all of those catchments. But I don't know enough of the detail.
Now, here's something a bit different. This is a question from Sarah Brennan, who asks you personally, what kind of changes have you made in your lives that have been directly involved in your views about climate change and what you can do?
I'm a green power user, so I pay the premium to run renewable energy in my house. I grow my own vegetables both in a veggie pot out the back and in a community garden around the corner. I'm an avid composter, not just of the words that tumble out of my mouth, but of actual organic matter. And you know, we're sort of pretty hot around here on the whole waste and recycling thing. The kids kind of have portfolios in terms of who manages what and who keeps everyone else accountable around the minimising of the packaging incoming, the recycling of the soft plastics outgoing. So, you know, whilst I wouldn't pretend to be a superstar on any of those metrics, I think we do a reasonable job.
Okay. Jono, what can you do in your place? I know that you're in a complex.
Yes, well, I believe that I've been on our residents committee a few times, and I believe that the activities there are in line with the things that we've been talking about. It is easier to do that when you're a group of 100 people living in 69 units, I have to say, than in an individual house even, because you've got all this sort of infrastructure and support to make sure that these things happen, I'd have to say, yeah.
Okay. Paul?
And my composting experience hasn't been one of great success. It's I was actually quite pleased when the when Boroondara introduced their FOGO system, because we were finding that it did make things a lot easier. I've never been able to quite get the consistency of my compost, but we keep on trying. But look, recycling is big in our place, and the other one is particularly on public transport. I must admit that COVID has probably changed my patterns a bit, but for years, like I worked at Melbourne Airport for 4.5 years before I was elected, and pretty much every day I'd catch public transport from this area, and sometimes Skybus and sometimes the full public transport experience, including once reaching Broadmeadows Station to see a train on fire. That was, you could see Will's eyes glaze over there. So it's
the real world.
Yeah, but to me that was a really important part of it, of trying to limit my my private vehicle use. Obviously, I've sort of had a few more concerns during COVID, but I'm sure we'll get back to public transport use soon.
Can I link this to a question that has come in from Gary Thompson about the Boroondara Council, because all of our actions start at home, they start locally, and we want to see councils taking on more so that they can not only look after their own emissions, but can encourage us in this community to have some incentives to change and do the sorts of things that you've begun to do yourselves. And the question is, Boroondara has adopted a climate action plan that sets community emissions target in Boroondara of 60% by 2030, above 2007 levels. This is vitally important to reach. How will the state help both the council and the Boroondara community reach or surpass these targets? I don't know if the state does in fact think in terms of how it might work in the regions in this fashion, and how to support communities that councils are trying to work with.
Well, the first thing I'd say, Carolyn, is I do want to acknowledge Gary Thompson, Councillor Thompson, and congratulate him on his term as mayor. But also should take the opportunity to quickly acknowledge the shadow member for Hawthorn, John Pursuto, who I understand is on the call, and also Ken Coghill, the former member for Werribee and former Speaker of the Victorian Legislative Assembly. It's interesting that we're getting questions from Gary. I think there's probably lots of questions we could be asking to Gary, but of course our responsibility, and he's already sledging me on text message, don't worry. So I've got a very good relationship with Gary. Our responsibility, of course, is a statewide responsibility. So we don't tend to think about some of these carbon abatement or emissions measures on an LGA by LGA basis. That's entirely appropriate that local governments think about that. But of course, we're actually already doing so much of the heavy lifting around that because of our aggressive strategy around renewables. Victoria leads the nation on this stuff. I had the pleasure in that little window between early this year to travel over to Adelaide to watch Melbourne lose a football game. But just the number of wind farms on that journey from Melbourne to Adelaide is just fantastic now. There is just so much of it, and I think that we are doing a huge amount in that space, and we're assisting every community in Victoria, whether defined by LGA or community of interest or geography. We're assisting every community to reach those emissions targets through the big one, which is stationary energy, and also now really putting a laser focus, on transport. And I did see one question earlier about farming. We've obviously got some work to do, particularly around methane and cattle, and that's something I know there's a fair bit of research effort going into at the minute.
Can I just add too? I don't think we should underestimate the work that schools are doing. That's probably what I know most about, and visiting government and non-government schools in my electorate. It's just terrific to meet kids now who don't just throw it in to please you or whatever, but they're fully versed, far better versed than I would have to acknowledge that I am. I don't know how much composting they do, but then I don't do much composting either, let me just say. But the awareness and the knowledge of it, and in their various subjects that they do, is very encouraging, I think, for the future. I must say, you're talking to the converted now amongst people under 20, 25 probably.
Okay.
Lovely, thank you. Angling towards the final question of a political legacy, we'll look at a few other issues here. The one I would ask the three of you is the role of independence, both at a federal and state level, in climate action.
Sorry, what was the question? The role of independence?
Yeah, so the
Political independence, TS.
Political independence. Yes.
Yeah. So we're talking about the Voices for Kooyong movement. We've seen Zali Steggall make some advances on some of these issues. We've seen Helen Haynes in Victoria make some advances on climate issues. Look, I think those independents have been a really interesting development in the Australian political landscape, because they've been a pro-environment thought in the side of conservative parties. That is different to the experience that Labor, of course, has had with the Greens. And so I think their role, where they're just, of course, where they're displacing coalition candidates, is to be applauded. But broadly speaking, I think there are some real challenges for the Nationals, because their state leadership is, at least purports to be, in favour of taking action on climate change, and their federal leadership clearly will do anything they can to telegraph to their communities of interest that they are far more interested in supporting coal than they are in supporting aggressive emissions reduction targets. That is a tension I expect independents to continue to exploit. And then in the Kooyong context, you've got that sort of that inner city or more inner, the Higgins, the Kooyongs of the world. They are again exploiting the fact that the Liberal Party, because it has amongst its membership, this is not a being obtuse about it, but the Liberal Party has amongst its membership, and I should say I'm excluding in this analysis the Liberals I mentioned earlier, but the Liberal Party has amongst its membership in the Victorian Parliament and the Federal Parliament people who don't believe in the science of climate change. That is a very difficult thing for people who are progressive on climate, like John Pesutto, like Gary Thompson. That is a difficult thing for them to navigate, but that is ultimately their fight to navigate. And those independents will continue to exploit that division inside the Liberal Party.
We're running out of time, aren't we? Are we time to do the legacy one, or do you want
Oh,
to?
yeah, time to do the legacy one. I think Carolyn sort of
Okay.
45
This
is
is one of the early questions, and I think it would be very interesting for you to reflect on the sort of things that you've had to deal with in your time. And let's just say you only had this one term. What do you think you could reflect on as being the sort of thing that you would want your legacy to be?
Me?
John, did you want to start off today?
No, you go, Paul.
Thank you. Look, I mean, I don't think any of us came in intending to leave a legacy as such, but I guess I'd like to be approach it in a very general sense in terms of leaving the community and leaving the state in a better place than what it was when I came in. I know that's been very hard. We've had 2 years of a lot of disruption, but I see in the local electorate, just in terms of like if I say, well, what are you proud of? And I've been really proud of the investment that we've made in schools across the electorate. A lot of them needing investment for quite some time. So even if I was able to, even if I wasn't successful in 2022, I'd be really proud that we were able to deliver for some of those schools.
Mm. Okay, John?
Yes, I'd be answering that question by saying that I believe that I've made some contribution to raising consciousness on issues like this, not just this, but issues like the refugees, which I know is a federal matter, protecting the ABC, you know, all these things have a contribution to make, particularly for groups such as, Lighter Footprints, of course. The Bill Street housing development is something that I'm very proud of. The Camberwell Green conversion will be something I'll be pleased to see. Developments at Fritz Holzer. But overall, in schools, particularly raising consciousness in schools, but also in seeing that these schools, you know, go from strength to strength with tremendous leadership at places like Auburn High, for example, and others as well. So they'd be the things that that I would be thinking about, whether or not I'm here again after 2022.
Okay. Well,
Yeah, Carolyn, I've got heaps left that I want to do in public life. I don't want to have to reflect on a legacy of a term that was, completely overrun by a global pandemic. In terms of looking forward, if I'm fortunate enough to be re-elected, and I will be a candidate at the election in 2022, I don't think the era for cities is over. There's been much proclamation in recent times about, you know, people exiting the city and living in the bush. I just think we have to do cities heaps better. We have to do better on urban heat island effect. We have to do better on the way we power our cities. We have to do better on the way we get around our cities. We have to do better on the way we live within the cities. We have to do better on the broad sustainability of our cities. And that actually takes a concerted, long-term effort. It takes some real forethought about where we want to be. And I think, frankly, things like the suburban rail loop speak very much to wanting to make our city a much better place. I'm all for subterranean public transport infrastructure. I'm all for making sure that a whole bunch of our infrastructure gets potentially moved underground. I'm all for making sure that our cities become sustainable in a genuine way, not in an applique way. It is not enough, frankly, to stick a few plants on the balcony, which is, you know, for some that greening of the urban space. That is just twang. We have to do way more than that. And I would like to think that if I'm fortunate enough to spend a bit of time in this game, that we'll be able to say that we made our city more sustainable, greener, easy to get around, and ultimately the sort of city that we all want to live in, and have done our bit to contribute to the great global challenge of climate change.
well, I'll vote for you.
great.
Shucks, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to bring this part of the evening to an end. We will be covering off next events and letters, but I'm going to thank the passion from Will and from John and Paul and giving their time. Absolutely appreciated. I think this is our second one that we've had with you guys, state MPs in our region. It's just so good to even though it's on Zoom, to get that connection. A couple of takeaways from me very quickly. I think the forests is a real touchstone. That issue is not going to go away. I know the politics are fraught with jobs and what the Nationals have said they will do, etc., etc. But WA's done it. WA's winding up native forest logging by 2024. And maybe we need a bit of a environment advisory group start up in this part of the world to start to work with our MPs, a little bit informally to try to see how we can do what WA has done. The second thing is coal and gas. Just reflecting on Gary Thompson's question about what state government can do to help communities, and it's very much a tripartite. It's very much Light Footprints is putting in a submission for 100% renewables. Victorian government's called for that this Friday. 100% renewables. How would we get there? Very much gas is yesterday's game. Drilling for gas off the 12 Apostles, off the Otway Basin, bringing gas down from Queensland and out of Moomba in South Australia. Those days are gone. Victoria's in a unique position for the government to move electricity off coal, for houses to move to electrification. It's a pretty simple sort of a proposition. And I think if community and council and people like us and the state government can get their heads around it, we could do this thing. It'd be really good. All right, so big thanks. I'm going to just quickly move into, I'm going to share my screen and show you next event. So if people could just hang around for sort of a few minutes while we do that, there's a lot coming up. It's not the one. That's the one. All right, can people see that?
Yep.
Okay, it's time to tell our community the truth. So we have a gas problem. We have good solutions right now. It's not technology, not taxes. The solutions of heat pumps for hot water, reverse cycle air conditioning, induction stoves, it's all available. We just need to get on with it. So anyone wants to get involved, get in touch with Lynn Franks. Join us Saturday mornings. We're down in Glenferrie. We're up in Kew. We're up in Camberwell on the street, 11 to 12. We need more people. Great conversations. We're really finding people are pretty engaged. All right, that's not working. Hang on, I'm just gonna go to that. So Saturday mornings, if you want more information, go onto the agenda, which is on your reminder email late this afternoon. Go on to that point. More info here. Love to have you. It's pretty good fun, and people are pretty. A lot of people, most people, the vast majority of people are up for the chat. Election is just around the corner. Light of Footprints, as we've talked about, is going to be very active in the federal election in Kooyong, you'd expect, but also in Higgins and in Chisholm to do what we can to raise the awareness of climate, to ask people to vote for climate candidates and make themselves aware and make their vote count. This feels like the one where climate is actually going to stay in the top 1 or 2 issues. So if you want to get involved in that and you're in Higgins or in Chisholm or in Kooyong, there's a spot for everyone, and we've already got weekly vigils going on across in Higgins outside Katie Allen's, asking her to try and get her message through the Nationals in Queensland. It's a difficult job. And so if you want to join that, that's the place to go on the agenda on your email. So we're running an online donation, Chuffed, as well, which is a platform for donations. We've got a bit of money raised already, but we'd love to get more so we can do a really good job with placards in front fences, with climate scorecards, and with running a candidate forum in March in the town hall in Hawthorn. Okay, a bit of advertising for some of our allies. We're really working with the guys at Yarra Energy Foundation and the Metro Community Power Hub. Peter Mercurio has, sorry, I've jumped one. Saul Griffiths, who's an Aussie guy. He's pretty charismatic if people haven't seen him yet. He's a guy that's worked in California and in the States quite a bit, and he's coming back to Australia, and he is full tilt and pretty interesting and fantastic person to listen to about electrifying homes and the community. So really recommend that, coming up November 25th, not far away. The other one is Making Solar Easy. We ran a really good night in November with Peter Mercurio, who's used to live in Burundara. He was telling me the other day. So he's a great presenter. I think that might be Carolyn's roof there. She's got a massive solar install on her roof now this year. And that'll be another night coming up on February 9th. So put that in your diary as well and keep an eye out for that one. Backed by Sustainability Victoria, which is the Victorian government's sustainability platform. So that's trusted suppliers, independent advice, which is often the tricky part to people working out how who can they trust and where they get advice. Here's a face that's becoming pretty familiar of late, but in his capacity as the senior advisor at the Melbourne Climate Energy College in Melbourne Uni, Simon Holmes at Court will be doing what he's done for us in the last at least 2 years, probably more, maybe 3 years, kicking off on February the 23rd with the big picture of where technology is in terms of energy and where are our clean energy opportunities. Simon is very much at the front and leading edge of what's going on. So that's pretty much a compelling proposition that you've got to put in your diary. Okay, there we are. There's a few people you might know and some you won't, because there's a pretty broad coalition already having weekly campaign climate rallies outside the Higgins MP's office. So if you want to get involved in that, yell out to Lynn Franks. That's a bit of fun. Coffee afterwards. Have a chat to the people over there in Higgins. Great way to spend the late morning. And Fridays are back. So many of you, Frydenberg's office coming up December the 10th, 5:30 to 6:30. So it's an evening sort of vigil. Dress up in something that is going to trigger fossil fuels. We've done so poorly in Glasgow. We've simply got to have a bit of fun with it and try and gain some self-respect by holding people to account. So I think that's it. Thank you. Most of that will be on your agenda. Now I'm going to hand over to Ray to track us through letters for the last month. Thanks, Ray.
Thanks, Mick. Can you see my screen, Mick?
We can, Ray. Yep.
Okay. We've got another good month coming up for November. When we're not quite through November yet, but you can see we're already approaching 100 letters for the month. Won't be quite as good as the previous month, I don't think, when we had the Mission Zero campaigns and the Murdoch press. That helped us a lot to make climate change a big topic. But having said that, November's also going really well. We've had nearly 1,200 letters published so far this year. And tomorrow we'll have our 900th climate-related letter published. I'm 99% sure. We've had incredible growth over the last 3 years in our number of letters published, as you can see from that graph. And so far, we've had over 70 letters published in the Australian, which is a great achievement. It's not easy to get in the Australian, especially climate-related letters. We've had over 100 this year in the Australian Financial Review, over 100 in the Herald Sun, over 250 in the Age, and we also write to newspapers around the country, and we've had over 500 already in interstate and regional newspapers. And our coverage map looks like that as of today. Sometimes the editor really likes our letters and features them, and so far this year we've had over 80 of our group's letters featured by editors. Congratulations in particular to Rob Brown, who unbelievably has had 6 lead letters published so far in the Australian Financial Review, a national paper. That's a fantastic achievement. I really still can't believe. I double check my counting all the time. This is the most recent lead letter that Rob had published on the 5th of this month. A lovely picture of the Prime Minister arriving back from Glasgow, being saluted. Well done, Rob. We've had altogether, it's been a good month. We've had 7 lead letters published this month, which is up there. I think it could even be a record, especially if you look at the papers. Some of these are quite hard to get into. You can see Rob's had 2 in the AFR this month. Amy Hiller, going great guns. She's had lead letter in the Good Weekend, which gets national coverage. And in the West Australian, it's very hard to get published over there. To get a lead letter is amazing. Barb Fraser's had 2. One of them in Pearls and Irritations, our first letter, the online newspaper, for want of a better word, published by John Menadue, the senior political advisor, retired now. So that's a great achievement by these writers for November. 2 of our writers, Amy Hiller and Barb Fraser, had their 100th letter published in November. So again, just amazing achievements this year. Special thank you to our early birds, John Gare, Malcolm Cameron, Amy Hiller and Corinne Ang in South Australia, who monitor those major papers for us each morning. Thank you very much. Oh, I've got some more. We'd love to, we would love you to join us if you go to our Take Action page. Please join us. Anyone can write a letter. Not everyone can get published though. We have a hints page there on our website. You might like to read if you're thinking about it. And join us today or even tomorrow. Thanks very much.
Very good. Thank you, Ray. Thanks to the letter writers. Thanks everyone for tonight. Good turnout. I think we were pretty close to 100 at the during the main course of the event. So thanks everyone. Thanks to the MPs and thanks to everyone who made it happen. Good night.